Year 8, this video is going to be feedback from the assessment you did on the Tudor era just before the February half term. I'm going to go through each question, and there will also be an example answer or a waggle for each one as well. So you're going to be able to look at how you achieved full marks in each question, and if applicable, how you can improve your own answers the next time you attempt a question like this. Okay, so let's get into it. Question number 1, a 4-mark question, an identify and question. The first one is tell me about a black Tudor you have studied. The second one was about how Edward VI changed the English church. You only had to answer one of the questions. It was either one or the other. Now, in the cases where students wrote an answer to both, what I did, unless you told me which one to mark, I looked at both and marked what I believe to be the strongest of the two answers. But you only had to answer one. This is only a knowledge question, and what I'm looking for is at least 2 accurate statements for each question. So let's have a look at the waggles on the next slide. Okay, so these answers were done by different students, but are shown next to each other there. So the first one that we're looking at here is John Blank, and there's definitely more than 2 accurate pieces of information. I've got how much he earned every year, what his job was, the kings that he worked for. He was the only black trumpeter for the royals, and he played at the coronation of Henry VIII. So we've got, I'd say, 4 accurate pieces of information there. And then in the second one, the changes Edward VI made to the English church. Well, we've got the fact that it became a Protestant church again, and then detailed knowledge of what those changes involved. So removal of decoration, the change, the less use of colour, because it was a distraction from the religion, and the movement of the priest, the removal of the statue of the Virgin Mary. There's lots of information there. There's definitely more than 2 accurate comments about the changes that Edward made. So both of those answers got full marks, and well done to those students who got full marks on this question. Okay, the next question is source-based, and initially you need to tick what the sources show, and then you need to tell me something that you know about it, both the content and the provenance of the source. And before we move on, most people got this, but just in case people weren't sure, it's Protestants that were being burned, and it wanted to gain sympathy. So your first 2 marks out of 6 in this question were for ticking the right boxes, and it's the top one in each case. It's Protestants that are being burnt, and it was produced to evoke sympathy with the victims. So the first 2 of your 6 votes is for that. The remaining 4 marks are for the explanation that you give about the content and the provenance of the source below. So there's a waggle on the next slide. Let's take a look at it and see how full marks can be achieved. Okay, so as you can see, this person has identified that these are Protestants being burned, and that the source was created to promote sympathy for those people. Let's have a look at the 2 accurate statements for each one. So it says that it's Latimer and Ridley, and that they are being burnt for the crime of heresy. And then for the provenance, it's from the Book of Martyrs, written by a Protestant, John Fox, released after Mary had died, so she never knew that this book was created. So because we've got certainly in the second part of the answer with the provenance, because we've got multiple accurate comments about the source's content and provenance, those additional 4 marks are well earned. Okay, the final question. What could a historian learn from this source? And there are 2 things I want to talk about before we look at the waggles. What do we mean by what could a historian learn from this source? And secondly, I want us to have a think about how we can show off knowledge of content, provenance, and own knowledge. For me, when we're talking about what we can learn from a source, we're talking about how useful it is. What can it teach us? And one thing that a lot of you will see in your answers, if you talked about whether it was reliable, you're not telling me what we can learn from it. You're telling me why it's not perfect. And no source ever is perfect. There is no source free from any bias. So you're not going to get marks for talking about whether we can trust it. But you can turn those negative comments about reliability into a positive comment about useful. So, for example, if you've written something like, it's not reliable because it was written by a Protestant, and Protestants hated Mary because of what she did to fellow Protestants. Instead of making that comment, you could turn that comment around to say that we can learn how strongly Protestants felt about Mary and the changes she tried to introduce. So you're turning a negative comment about reliability into a positive comment about usefulness, what we can learn. And in this question, when I'm marking it, I'm looking for 2 marks for content, 2 marks for provenance, and 2 marks for context, your own knowledge. Let's have a look at the waggle on the next slide, and I'll show you how 6 out of 6 can be awarded. Now, I know that this was the most difficult answer on this assessment, and I expect a lot of you will be listening carefully and looking at the waggle to figure out exactly how we can improve our answers. So, what you can see from my marking of this answer is CX for context, so where someone's telling me what they know. P's for provenance, and CN for content, what you can see. And as I said, I'm looking to give a maximum of 2 marks for each. So if you've not mentioned any provenance, you're only getting 4 marks. If you've not got any provenance or any own knowledge, you're only going to get 2 marks. You can see that the most frequently mentioned aspect of the answer here is context, because this person knows that Latimer and Ridley were Protestants, that they had committed heresy, and an explanation of what heresy was, and then an example of knowledge of Mary's nickname, Bloody Mary. So we've got 3 comments about context, and they're all accurate. Content, it says we can see that they died a horrible death, that they were burned at the stake. And it also says Fox may have been a Protestant. Now, for me, it's clear that this person is a Protestant. And if you look at the last question, ticking the second box to say that it was made to create sympathy for Protestant, we can definitely take an educated guess at the least that John Fox is in fact a Protestant. And it says there he exaggerated the content to make people feel upset with Mary's actions and sympathising with Protestants. What this person has done here is they've turned what could have been a negative comment about reliability into a positive comment about what we can learn about how John Fox and other Protestants felt about Mary and the way that she tried to introduce and force her religious changes on the nation. So, because we've got multiple comments that are all accurate about provenance, content and context, this gets 4 marks. The one thing that, if I'm being overly critical, the one thing that I would say is that I probably hope that everybody by now knows that John Fox very much is a Protestant. But you're not going to lose a mark for saying may have rather than was. Okay, so what now? How do we make this video useful to you? What I would like you to do is I would like you to look back at your own answers. See which questions that you dealt with well, see which questions you need to improve on, and even then, there may be a question that you know you need to improve on, but it's an easy fix and you know how to make sure you can improve your answer next time. What I want you to do is set a what went well and an even better if. So your what went well is what have you done that was also mentioned by me or was written in the waggles. What have you done that I've said is exactly what you need to do. And then your even better if is how can you continue to improve. So that could be something to do with your revision. It could be something to do with how you approach answering the question. It could be answer technique. Could be a range of things. But I want you to have a look at those waggles and listen to my advice. And again, think about how could you improve next time you do those types of question. And what I would do is I would ask you to write your what went well and your even better if, both on the assignment in Shobi and the assessment record that's in your history book. I'll share boundaries for securing, developing and mastering in class, but what I want you to do is have a look and set your own targets, and then we can talk about grade boundaries later. well done to everybody who got full marks in any of those questions, particularly to those people whose answers I've used in the video as well. Thank you for that. I think that question 3 was particularly difficult, and I think for a lot of us that will be something that we're focusing our feedback on. But generally, I'm very pleased with how you did. Well done.